The glass shattered across the marble floor, champagne spreading like a broken promise. Naomi Bennett stood frozen at the center of her executive suite, phone still pressed to her ear, the lawyer's words echoing in the sudden silence. The acquisition fell through. The board voted. I'm sorry, but effective immediately, you're no longer CEO. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered 40 stories below, indifferent to her collapse. She'd built this company from nothing, poured 12 years into every decision, every risk, every sacrifice. And now, in a single conference call, it was gone. Her hands trembled as she set down the phone. The champagne had been meant for celebration, the acquisition that would have secured everything. Instead, she just lost her company to a hostile takeover, orchestrated by the very board members she'd trusted. Naomi sank into her chair, the leather suddenly unfamiliar, no longer hers. The office that had been her second home, her fortress, now felt like a stage after the curtain fell, empty, waiting for the next performer. She should call someone, her assistant, her lawyer, her ex-husband who would probably laugh. But her contact list was full of professional connections, strategic relationships, people who valued what she could do for them. Not a single person she could call just to hear a friendly voice. The realization settled over her like cold water. She'd built an empire and lost herself in the process. 41 years old, no company, no real friends, no family beyond her mother in a care facility 3 states away. She'd postponed that visit for 6 months now, always too busy. Always another crisis demanding attention. The cleaning crew would arrive soon. She should leave before facing that particular humiliation. But as she gathered her personal belongings, which fit embarrassingly into a single box, she realized she had nowhere urgent to be. No meetings tomorrow, no presentations to prepare, no decisions waiting for her approval. Just silence in the hollow space where her identity used to be. Jack Dalton pushed his cart through the executive floor at 9 p.m., right on schedule. He'd worked the night shift at this building for 7 years, long enough to know which offices belonged to workaholics, which to corner cutters who left early and which remained perpetually dark. The executive suite was usually empty by now, dark except for security lighting. Tonight, a single office blazed with light. Through the glass walls, he could see a woman sitting motionless at a desk, staring at nothing. Not working, just sitting. He recognized her from the building directory and occasional late-night encounters in the lobby. The CEO, though he'd never learned her name. She'd never looked at him long enough for introductions. Most executives didn't. To them, he was furniture that moved. He debated leaving her undisturbed, but something about her posture, the defeated slope of her shoulders triggered instincts he'd learned to trust. He knocked gently on the doorframe. She looked up, startled, as though she'd forgotten other people existed. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry past the point of tears. "Building's closing soon," he said simply. "You all right?" She stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then stopped. Looked at him properly for perhaps the first time. "Actually, no, I'm not fine at all." Jack leaned his mop against the wall. He'd seen enough devastation in his 43 years to recognize it in others. "You want to talk about it?" "Why would you care?" The question wasn't hostile, just genuinely confused. "Because you look like someone who just lost everything," Jack replied. "I know what that feels like." Something in his tone, the quiet authority of shared experience, made her pause. "They took my company," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I built it from nothing, 12 years, and they just voted me out like I was nothing." Jack nodded slowly. "That's rough. What kind of company?" "Tech, medical software. We helped hospitals coordinate care, reduce errors, save lives." She laughed bitterly. "At least we used to. Now it'll probably become just another profit center for the vultures who bought us out." "Sounds like you actually cared about the work," Jack observed. "Not just the success." She looked at him again, really seeing him this time. Early 40s, weathered face, kind eyes that suggested he'd earned that kindness through experience rather than naivety. His uniform was clean but worn, name tag slightly crooked. I did care, she admitted. Maybe too much. I neglected everything else. And now I have this company-sized hole in my life and nothing to fill it with. You could start over, Jack suggested. Build something new. With what? I signed away my shares as part of my exit. Walked away with severance, but my reputation is destroyed. The press will paint this as a failure. No investor will touch me. She stood abruptly, grabbing her box. I should go, let you work. But at the elevator she hesitated, turned back. What's your name? Jack Dalton. I'm Naomi Bennett. She shifted the box awkwardly. Thank you for checking on me. You didn't have to do that. Everybody needs someone to check on them sometimes, Jack replied. After she left, he finished cleaning the executive suite, noting the half-empty champagne bottle, the scattered papers, the framed awards she'd left behind. He thought about the woman who'd poured her life into building something meaningful, only to have it taken away. He understood that particular pain more intimately than she could know. Jack had once been someone else entirely. Dr. Jackson Dalton, emergency medicine, one of the most promising young physicians at a major hospital. He'd loved the work, the puzzle-solving under pressure, the satisfaction of saving lives in those critical moments when minutes mattered. Then his wife died. Suddenly. An aneurysm that gave no warning, no time for goodbyes. One moment they were planning their daughter's 5th birthday party. The next he was making decisions about organ donation. The grief had been crushing, but he'd tried to push through, returning to work after the minimum bereavement leave. His daughter Emma needed stability, needed routine. But trauma doesn't respect schedules. 3 months after losing his wife, Jack froze during a critical procedure. His hands, usually steady and sure, trembled. His mind, trained to process information rapidly, went blank. The patient survived, thanks to a colleague who stepped in. But Jack knew he couldn't risk it happening again. He couldn't trust himself with lives when his own life felt so fragile. He'd resigned quietly, taking a medical leave that became permanent. The hospital was understanding, offering counseling, time, whatever he needed. But Jack couldn't imagine returning to that high-stakes environment while drowning in his own darkness. Emma, at 5 years old, needed a father who could be present, who wouldn't disappear into 12-hour shifts and overnight calls, who could walk her to school and be home when she woke from nightmares about her mother. So Jack found work that demanded less of him mentally. Janitorial services, night shifts when Emma slept at his mother's apartment upstairs. The work was honest, physical, left his mind free to process grief without the pressure of life or death decisions. 7 years later, Emma was 12, thriving despite their modest circumstances. She was brilliant, curious, asking questions that reminded Jack of why he'd loved medicine in the first place. The investigation, the discovery, the help. His mother had early-stage dementia now, still functional but declining slowly. Jack managed her care while working nights, sleeping in fragments, existing in a state of perpetual exhaustion that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. He'd lost his career, his wife, his former life, but he'd kept Emma safe, kept her fed and housed and loved. That mattered more than the letters before his name or the respect of his former colleagues. Most days he believed that. Naomi didn't expect to see the janitor again. She'd moved out of her penthouse, the mortgage too expensive without her CEO's salary, into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where she didn't recognize anyone. Her severance would last a few months if she was careful, but her carefully constructed life had shattered so completely she wasn't sure which pieces were worth salvaging. The press had been brutal. Speculation about mismanagement, about conflicts with the board, about her aggressive expansion strategy. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than narrative. Her professional network evaporated overnight. Calls went unreturned. Lunch invitations disappeared. She was a liability now, associated with failure. The isolation was profound and clarifying. She'd mistaken networking for friendship, professional respect for personal connection. Now, stripped of her title and power, she understood the difference. 3 weeks after her termination, Naomi found herself in the lobby of her old building, having been summoned to sign final paperwork. The meeting was humiliating, lawyers from both sides, her former CFO barely making eye contact as they slid documents across the table. Afterward, she sat in the lobby longer than necessary, unwilling to return to her empty apartment. "You look like you could use some coffee," a familiar voice said. Jack stood nearby in street clothes, not his uniform. He carried a backpack and looked tired in a way that suggested his exhaustion was chronic. "I'm off shift," he explained, "but I saw you through the window. Figured you might need a friendly face." The kindness was so unexpected, so unearned, that Naomi felt something crack in her chest. "I don't even drink coffee anymore," she said. Gave it up after the acquisition fell through. Seemed pointless without the early meetings. "Tea then, or just a place to sit that isn't this lobby?" He gestured toward the door. "There's a diner 2 blocks over, best pie in the city," which admittedly isn't saying much, but it's something. She shouldn't go. She didn't know this man beyond a 5-minute conversation, but the alternative was going home to an apartment that still didn't feel like home, to another night of staring at job listings for positions she was simultaneously overqualified and too controversial for. "Pie sounds good," she said. The diner was exactly as Jack described, unremarkable except for genuinely excellent pie. They sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, and Naomi ordered apple with ice cream because Jack insisted the combination was mandatory. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence. Then Jack asked, "What happens now, after you sign all the papers and walk away?" "I have no idea," Naomi admitted. "I've been CEO or working toward being CEO since I was 23. I don't know who I am without it." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Jack suggested. "Getting to figure out who you are from scratch. Easy to say, harder to do when you're 41 with a resume that now screams damaged goods." She pushed pie around her plate. "What about you? What do you do besides clean office buildings and recommend pie?" Jack's expression closed slightly. "I work nights, raise my daughter, help take care of my mother. Pretty straightforward." But Naomi had spent years reading people, detecting the things they didn't say. "What did you do before cleaning offices?" He considered her for a long moment. "I was a doctor, emergency medicine." The revelation hung between them. Naomi set down her fork. "You were a physician and now you clean buildings." It wasn't a question, but Jack answered anyway. "My wife died 7 years ago. I had a daughter who needed me. Emergency medicine wasn't compatible with being the parent she needed." The simplicity of his explanation, the absence of self-pity, made it more devastating somehow. That must have been an incredible sacrifice. "It was an obvious choice," Jack corrected gently. "Emma needed stability more than I needed a career. Some decisions make themselves." Naomi thought about her own choices, the relationships she'd sacrificed for professional advancement, the friendships that withered from neglect, the potential for family she'd postponed indefinitely. "I never had children," she said quietly. "Never made time for it. Thought there would always be later, after the next milestone, the next funding round, the next acquisition." "It's not too late," Jack offered. "It feels too late. I'm unemployed, single, living in an apartment I can barely afford." She laughed without humor. "Not exactly ideal circumstances for building a family." "No circumstances are ideal," Jack replied. "You just figure it out as you go." They started meeting regularly after that. Not dates exactly, but something undefined that felt necessary to them both. Jack would finish his shift, and sometimes Naomi would be waiting in the lobby, unable to sleep, seeking company in the quiet hours when isolation pressed hardest. They'd talk about everything except what they'd lost. Emma's latest science project, which involved growing crystals and had taken over Jack's entire kitchen. His mother's declining memory, the way she sometimes forgot Emma's name but remembered songs from her childhood with perfect clarity. Naomi's attempts to reinvent herself, the consulting opportunities that fizzled when potential clients learned her history, the volunteer work she'd started at a free health clinic, helping with administrative systems, finding satisfaction in small improvements that actually help people. "You're good at this," Jack observed one night, watching her troubleshoot a scheduling system at the clinic. The hands-on problem solving, not from a corner office but in the actual trenches. "It's different than I expected," Naomi admitted. "When I ran the company, I made decisions that affected thousands of people, but I never saw the impact. Now I'm helping maybe 50 patients a week get appointments more efficiently, and somehow it feels more meaningful." Jack nodded, understanding. Scale isn't the same as significance. "Is that what you tell yourself about leaving medicine?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but Jack didn't seem offended. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "Mostly I tell myself that I made the right choice for Emma. But there are moments, 3 a.m. when I'm cleaning an office and I hear an ambulance, that I wonder about the person inside, whether I could have helped." "Do you ever think about going back?" "Every day." His admission was quiet but absolute. "But going back would mean less time with Emma, more stress, the risk of freezing again when someone's life depends on me. I'm not sure I could trust myself." "You're one of the most steady people I've met," Naomi said. "I find that hard to believe. Steadiness in cleaning offices isn't the same as steadiness in a trauma bay when everything's going wrong." Jack met her eyes. "But thank you." They sat in silence, two people who'd walked away from versions of themselves they weren't sure they could reclaim. "I got offered a job," Naomi said eventually. "Small healthcare startup. They want someone to help develop coordination software for rural clinics. It's a fraction of my old salary, basement office, no prestige. But I actually want to do it. The work sounds meaningful, and I think I could be good at it without sacrificing everything else." She paused. "Is it settling? Taking something smaller after building something so much bigger? Is it settling to choose a life that makes you happy over one that makes you impressive?" Jack countered. "Only you can answer that." Emma met Naomi by accident 3 months into whatever their relationship was. Jack had invited Naomi to his apartment for dinner, wanting her to taste his mother's famous recipe for pot roast that he'd learned to recreate. But when Naomi arrived, she found Jack in the hallway looking apologetic. "Emma's sick," he explained. "Nothing serious, just a stomach bug, but she's miserable and I can't leave her. I'm sorry, I should have called." "Can I help?" The offer surprised them both. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Actually, yes. Come up." The apartment was small but carefully maintained. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and textbooks were stacked neatly on a corner table where Jack apparently did homework with his daughter. A framed photograph of a smiling woman, Emma's mother, held a place of honor on the bookshelf. Emma was 12, dark-haired and pale, curled on the couch under a blanket. She looked at Naomi with undisguised curiosity. "You're the lady Dad talks about," Emma said. "The one who lost her company." "Emma," Jack said warningly. "It's okay," Naomi assured him. To Emma, she said, "Yes, that's me, and you're the one growing crystals in the kitchen. They're in the bathroom now, better temperature control." Emma managed a weak smile. "I'm sorry you're sick," Naomi said, settling into a chair. "Is there anything that helps? Dad makes this ginger tea that doesn't taste completely terrible." Emma glanced at her father. "But he can't make it and watch the pot roast at the same time without burning something." "I can make tea," Naomi offered, "if you tell me where everything is." For the next hour, Naomi found herself doing something entirely foreign to her previous existence, caring for a sick child while helping prepare dinner. Emma gave detailed instructions about the proper ginger-to-honey ratio, critiqued Naomi's tea-steeping technique, and asked surprisingly sophisticated questions about running a company. "Why did they take it away?" Emma asked directly. "If you built it, shouldn't it be yours?" "It's complicated," Naomi began, then stopped. Emma deserved a real answer. I made decisions that scared them. I wanted to help more people, even if it meant taking financial risks. They wanted safer profits. When you start a company, you often have to accept money from investors, and eventually they get more control than you do. Emma considered this. That seems like a design flaw. It absolutely is, Naomi agreed, surprised by how the child's clear-eyed observation cut to the heart of it. The system is flawed. So build a better system, Emma said, as if it were obvious. Later, after Emma fell asleep and the pot roast was served, Jack apologized again. Sorry you got drafted into childcare. That wasn't part of the invitation. It was good, Naomi said, meaning it. She's remarkable, your daughter. She is, Jack agreed with unmistakable pride. Smarter than I was at her age, maybe smarter than I am now. She gets that from you, Naomi observed. The clarity, cutting through complexity to what matters. They talked until late into the night, voices low to avoid waking Emma. Jack's mother came down from her upstairs apartment briefly, introduced herself with charming confusion about whether she'd met Naomi before, and retreated again. In that modest apartment, surrounded by evidence of careful, loving parenthood, Naomi felt something shift inside her. I spent 12 years building a company, she said quietly. But you built a life, a real one, with your daughter, with your mother. That's harder, I think. Different skills, Jack replied. I couldn't do what you did. Build something from nothing, lead people, make decisions that affect thousands. And I couldn't do what you've done. Give up everything you worked for, start over completely, raise a child alone. She met his eyes. I think your way takes more courage. Jack shook his head. It wasn't courage, it was just love. You do what needs doing for the people who depend on you. The simplicity of his philosophy, the absence of drama or self-congratulation, made Naomi realize how much noise had filled her previous life. The constant need to prove herself, to achieve more, to be seen as successful. Jack had given up being seen entirely, had accepted invisibility as the price of being present for his daughter. I took the job, she said suddenly. The rural healthcare startup. I signed the contract this morning. Jack smiled, genuine pleasure lighting his tired face. That's great, really great. It's terrifying, Naomi admitted, starting over at 41 in a basement office, but Emma was right. If the system is flawed, maybe I should help build a better one. When do you start? 2 weeks. They're based in the city, but I'll be traveling to rural clinics a lot, seeing firsthand how they operate. She hesitated. I'll miss our late-night conversations. We'll figure it out, Jack said. Different schedules, same connection. 6 months later, Naomi's new position consumed her in ways both exhausting and energizing. The work was harder than running her previous company because she was no longer insulated by layers of management. She drove hours to visit tiny clinics, sat with overworked nurses and frustrated doctors, learned about problems that had never appeared in her sanitized reports when she'd been CEO. The rural healthcare system wasn't just broken, it was hemorrhaging. Clinics couldn't attract providers, couldn't afford modern equipment, couldn't coordinate care effectively. Patients drove hours for basic treatment. Emergency rooms became primary care because there was nowhere else to go. But within the dysfunction, Naomi saw patterns, solutions that didn't require massive funding, just smarter coordination. Her software development background combined with her new ground-level perspective created insights neither the technologists nor the rural providers had alone. She started building prototypes, simple systems that solved specific problems. A scheduling platform that let patients book appointments via text message, critical in areas with limited internet. A coordination system that helped clinics share specialists efficiently. A supply chain network that prevented shortages of basic medications. The work wasn't glamorous, no press coverage, no investor presentations, no glossy magazine features. But clinics started using her systems, patients started getting better care. And for the first time in her professional life, Naomi could directly see the impact of her work in the grateful faces of people who'd been struggling. Jack watched her transformation with quiet pride. Their relationship had deepened into something neither had planned but both needed. Emma adored Naomi, particularly after Naomi spent an entire weekend helping her build a robotics project for the science fair. Jack's mother, in her moments of clarity, approved with the simple wisdom of someone who'd learned to value substance over surface. But Jack could see the exhaustion building in Naomi. She was working brutal hours again, driven by the same intensity that had consumed her before, only now directed at problems that seemed endless. "You're going to burn out," he warned one evening when she arrived at his apartment after midnight, eyes shadowed with fatigue. "There's always one more clinic, one more problem to solve. You can't fix everything yourself." "I have to try," Naomi insisted. "These people have been ignored for so long. If I don't help them, who will?" "Other people," Jack said gently. "You can't carry the entire rural healthcare system on your shoulders. That's not sustainable." "You sound like my old board," Naomi snapped, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, I'm just tired." "I sound like someone who cares about you," Jack corrected, "and who has watched you pour yourself into work at the expense of everything else before. This time you have people who want to be part of your life. Don't sacrifice that again." His words hit harder because they were true. Naomi sank onto his couch, feeling the weight of her exhaustion. "I don't know how to do this differently. Working this hard is the only way I know." "Then learn a new way," Jack suggested. "Set boundaries, hire help, build a team instead of trying to be everything yourself." "With what money? We're a tiny startup." "Then start smaller. Solve fewer problems better instead of trying to solve everything inadequately." Jack sat beside her. "You're trying to prove you're not a failure by succeeding impossibly, but you were never a failure in the first place." Naomi felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally surface. "They took everything I built, everything I worked for. I need to prove they were wrong." "They were wrong," Jack agreed. "But not because you build something bigger or more successful. They were wrong because they valued profit over people, because they couldn't see past quarterly reports to the actual good your work did." He took her hand. "You don't need to prove anything. You just need to do good work and have a life. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." That night, Naomi made changes. She hired 2 junior developers, talented recent graduates who couldn't afford to work for big tech companies but believed in the mission. She set actual work hours and stuck to them, even when problems beckoned. She started spending weekends with Jack and Emma, letting their routines and rituals become part of her life. The work continued, but it no longer consumed her entirely. The crisis came on a cold morning in late autumn. Jack's mother had a severe stroke, sudden and devastating. Jack found her collapsed in her apartment when he went to check on her before Emma woke for school. The hospital, the same one where Jack had once worked, offered excellent care but grim prognosis. Significant brain damage, unlikely to recover meaningful function. Decisions needed to be made about long-term care, about quality of life, about when intervention became cruelty. Jack faced these decisions alone while trying to shield Emma from the worst of it, while maintaining his work schedule because he couldn't afford to lose income, while his mother lay unconscious in intensive care. Naomi arrived at the hospital without being asked, simply appeared with coffee and food Jack couldn't eat, took over the logistics he was too devastated to handle, sat with him through the long hours of waiting for changes that didn't come. "You don't have to be here," Jack said, though his gratitude was obvious. "Yes, I do," Naomi replied. When Jack had to leave to get Emma from school, Naomi stayed with his mother, holding the unconscious woman's hand, talking quietly about her son and granddaughter, about the family they'd built together. Emma took her grandmother's condition hard, crying in ways that tore at Jack's composure. His daughter had already lost her mother. Losing her grandmother felt unbearably cruel. Jack held her, made promises about everything being okay that he wasn't sure he could keep, tried to be strong when he felt like collapsing. Naomi stepped in where Jack couldn't. She took Emma out for dinner when Jack needed to stay late at the hospital, helped with homework when Jack was too exhausted to think straight, listened when Emma needed to talk about her fear and sadness. 3 days after the stroke, Jack's mother died without regaining consciousness. The funeral was small, attended by neighbors and a few distant relatives, by Emma's tearful friends from school, by Naomi, who stood beside Jack throughout with quiet strength. Afterward, Jack broke. 7 years of holding everything together, of being strong for Emma, of managing grief and responsibility and the constant pressure of surviving, finally exceeded his capacity. He wept in Naomi's arms in the empty apartment that still smelled like his mother's lavender sachets, mourning not just this fresh loss, but everything he'd lost before: his wife, his career, his mother, the life he'd thought he'd have. Naomi held him without trying to fix anything, understanding finally that sometimes the only help possible was presence. In the weeks after his mother's death, Jack struggled. His carefully constructed balance, work and parenting and caregiving collapsed. He was either working or caring for Emma, with no time for processing grief, no space for healing. Emma, dealing with her own loss, needed more attention than usual. Jack gave it willingly, but felt himself fragmenting under the strain. "I need to find a different job," he told Naomi one evening. "Day shift so I can be home with Emma at night. She's having nightmares. She needs me there." "What about medical school?" Naomi asked quietly. "What about going back to being a doctor?" Jack shook his head. "That's a fantasy. I've been out too long. I'd have to do residency again. There's no way to make that work with Emma." "What if there was?" Naomi leaned forward. "What if someone helped with Emma while you worked? What if your financial situation was different?" "Naomi, I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," she interrupted. "It's investing in people. You told me once that I needed to build a better system. Well, I'm trying. And that system needs doctors who actually care about patients, who understand what it's like to struggle, who won't burn out because they're only in it for prestige." She pulled out her laptop. "The Rural Healthcare Initiative is expanding. We're partnering with medical schools to create programs for doctors willing to work in underserved areas. Loan forgiveness, housing assistance, support systems." Jack stared at her. "You built this program." "I built it thinking about you," Naomi admitted. "About how many brilliant doctors are working other jobs because the system failed them. About how many communities need providers who are willing to actually show up and care." "I can't go back," Jack said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "I froze, Naomi. I put a patient at risk." 7 years ago, while drowning in fresh grief," she replied. "You're not that person anymore. You're someone who's learned to handle impossible situations while raising a child alone. That's exactly who rural medicine needs." Over the following months, the possibility that had seemed impossible became real. Jack applied to a re-entry program for physicians designed for doctors who'd left practice. Emma, now 13 and more independent, supported the idea with unexpected maturity. "Grandma would want you to do this," she said. "She always said you were meant to be a doctor." Jack was accepted into the program, a condensed residency focused on rural emergency medicine. The schedule was brutal but manageable with Naomi's help. She'd moved into a larger apartment, and Emma stayed there during Jack's overnight shifts, doing homework at Naomi's kitchen table, learning about healthcare software development, becoming part of Naomi's life in ways that felt natural to them both. Watching Jack return to medicine was like watching someone remember who they were. The confidence came back gradually, along with the joy he'd lost. He was older now, more patient, carrying wisdom earned through loss that made him better with scared patients and complicated cases. The transformation was remarkable not because it was dramatic, but because it was so clearly right. 2 years after losing her company, Naomi stood in a rural clinic 4 hours from the city, watching Jack treat patients with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. He'd completed his re-entry program and accepted a position with the Rural Health Network, splitting his time between several small clinics that had gone years without consistent providers. Emma, now 15, had become passionate about healthcare access, volunteering with Naomi's organization, building websites for rural clinics, talking about medical school herself someday. She'd taken her grandmother's death and transformed it into purpose, finding meaning in making sure others didn't suffer from inadequate care. Naomi's company had grown beyond her initial vision, not into another corporate giant, but into a sustainable organization that actually solved problems. They had 30 employees now, all passionate about the mission, all committed to putting service above profit. The work was harder and less profitable than her previous company, but infinitely more satisfying. "You're staring," Jack said, appearing beside her with a smile. "Just thinking," Naomi replied, "about everything that's changed. Regrets? None." She took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over 2 years of building something together. "I thought losing my company was the worst thing that could happen. Turns out it was the beginning." "Of what?" Jack asked. "Of actually mattering," Naomi said simply. "When I ran that company, I affected thousands of people I never met. Now I work with dozens of clinics and hundreds of patients, and I know their names. I see the difference. That matters more than any valuation ever did." Jack nodded understanding. They'd both learned the same lesson through different paths. Significance wasn't about scale, but about depth, about showing up consistently for people who needed you, about building something sustainable rather than impressive. That evening, they drove back to the city together, Emma asleep in the back seat with homework scattered around her. They'd become a family through loss and reconstruction, through learning to value presence over prestige, through choosing the harder path that led toward meaning. "I got a call from my old board member," Naomi mentioned. "The company I founded is failing. The acquisition gutted it. They wanted to know if I'd consider coming back as a consultant." "What did you say?" "I said no." Naomi glanced at Jack. 2 years ago, I would have jumped at the chance for vindication. Now I just feel sorry for them. They had something good and destroyed it chasing profit." "You could have gloated," Jack observed with a slight smile. "I could have," Naomi agreed, "but it would have been empty. The person I am now doesn't need that validation." They drove in comfortable silence, the city lights growing brighter as they approached home. Everything Naomi had lost, her company, her reputation, her carefully constructed life, had seemed like devastation. But those losses had cleared space for something better: genuine connection, meaningful work, and a family built not through biology but through choice. Jack had sacrificed his career to be present for his daughter, then found his way back through circuitous paths. Emma had lost her mother and grandmother but found purpose in their absence. Naomi had lost everything she'd thought defined her and discovered who she actually was beneath the titles. They were all transformed by loss, made better through the breaking. The janitor who'd once been invisible had become the steady center of a new kind of family. The CEO who'd lost her company had found her purpose, and the girl who'd lost too much had learned that families could be built from pieces. None of it was what any of them had planned. All of it was exactly what they needed.